So the splicing feature on my phone is not working correctly. I have a 5, it's old. So this is going to do a separate video. So our second book for today, which actually would have been what I talked about on Thursday, In Cold Blood was supposed to be yesterday on Wednesday. This book is called In Colder Blood by J.T. Hunter. And as you can see, this is a much smaller book. Truman Capote was kind of long-winded, so In Cold Blood itself counts as 2. If you were reading it and you were really struggling, actually, let's just say In Cold Blood's going to count as 3, because there's just a lot here. This is like a really, really good piece of cheesecake. It's very rich. You don't want to dive into it every day, and you kind of feel a sense of reward when you finish it, along with almost a stomach ache. So we're going to say In Cold Blood is worth 3. Again, you can find it in the true crime section. In Colder Blood, J.T. Hunter, significantly smaller. This one's worth 1. Miss Clark introduced me to this book, and after the 2 men murdered the Clutter family in Holcomb, they set out for parts unknown, and a month later, another family of 4, a mother, a father, and 2 small children, a boy and a girl, were killed in Florida, where the 2 murderers of the Clutters were known to be. And they've never been able to definitively prove with concrete certainty that Hickok and Smith, who are the Clutter family murderers, committed this murder in Florida. But In Colder Blood presents the case from a very definitive standpoint that yes, they did. So this one will also be housed in true crime. As you can see, it's a nonfiction book. And I'm going to read you a brief section that calls back to the other case. I will warn you, this book has crime scene photos. If you are very sensitive to the death of a child, this is not a book that you're going to want to... How do I describe this? Don't look at the crime scene photos if it's something that's going to upset you. I'm not going to show those. But, Chapter 8, The Circumstances of Evidence. So when someone commits a crime, you have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they are the ones who did it. A lot of you have we watched that Forensic Files episode where they were able to prove conclusively with handwriting analysis, eyewitness statements, and a fingerprint that Treflo was the Iron Guard member who murdered hundreds of Jews in Romania during World War II. So that was concrete, that was conclusive. I can't just say, hey, Mr. Buckman stole $10 out of my desk. I have to have evidence to back that up, and the police would not be able to arrest him. They probably wouldn't arrest him for $10, but go with me on it. Unless they could concretely prove it. Okay? So, here we go. Circumstances of evidence. Despite all the unusual similarities and incriminating coincidences between the Clutter and Walker family murders, nothing in the Walker case file gave an indication that anyone from Sarasota Sheriff's Office had ever interviewed Hickok or Smith about the Walker killings. McGath, who's the investigator now, could not help but lament this missed opportunity. She knew from experience that the first interview with the suspect constitutes a crucial time period for obtaining candor, since it is when they are most vulnerable, before the passage of time allows them to distance themselves from their crimes and create false alibis. After their arrest, the initial interview of Hickok and Smith had been conducted by members of the Las Vegas Police Department, who had no inkling that the 2 men might be connected to a quadruple murder on the other side of the country in Florida. Even subsequent interviews of Hickok and Smith conducted by the Kansas Bureau of Investigation had focused on the Clutter case, with no mention of the Walker murders until much later in the process. McGath also knew that her task had been made more difficult due to other mistakes committed by investigators early in the case. Indeed, since Sheriff Boyer did not have a crime scene team in 1959, he allowed liberal access to the Walker home after the bodies were discovered, actively enlisting press photographers to take pictures inside the home and permitting reporters to wander through the site. Bad idea. It is also likely that one of the first deputies to respond to the site had inadvertently destroyed tire tracks left behind by the killers. We know today that's not what you do, but at the time they didn't know better. Forensics wasn't quite as well known as it is now. Convinced that Hickok and Smith committed the Walker murders, but lacking direct evidence that could conclusively tie them to the crime, McGath turned to ever-evolving field of forensic DNA analysis. During early 2012, McGath made a series of unsuccessful attempts to locate a relative of Dick Hickok who would be willing to provide DNA samples that would allow comparison testing with the evidence recovered at the scene of the Walker murders. She was also frustrated by the inability to obtain palm prints of Hickok or Smith to compare against the partial palm print recovered from the bathtub faucet handle in the Walker home. One promising lead that developed on the DNA front soon after turned into another dead end. A KBI agent had managed to obtain a DNA profile for one of Hickok's purported children, a son named DR. Paternity is always a mess. They always prefer to have maternal or mother relatives because then they can compare what's called mitochondrial DNA. So paternal DNA is good, but once in a while you end up with a secret in the family line where somebody's dad wasn't actually who they thought it was, and that causes problems. So you always have to be careful with alleged children because you got to be able to prove they are who they are, and it's kind of a mess. Although DR had declined to voluntarily provide a DNA sample, the KBI agent he met with to discuss the matter was able to procure his profile from a styrofoam cup that DR had used during their meeting. Unfortunately, subsequent analysis showed that the DNA profile taken from the cup was not consistent with the suspect profile attained at the crime scene. Disappointing as this news was, it did not weaken McGath's resolve to exhaust all available avenues to prove her theory. As explained by the KBI, there were many possibilities for the negative results, including that DR was not really the biological child of Hickok, or that the styrofoam cup had been contaminated either in storage or during the testing process. Another possibility was that the suspect sample from Christine Walker's body itself was contaminated. In light of the uncertainty surrounding DR's DNA profile, McGath decided that she needed to go straight to the source. She would try to get DNA directly from the remains of Dick Hickok and Perry Smith. In early November, using a court order template provided by the KBI, she started writing the probable cause narrative to be filled in support of a proposed order from a Kansas court that would allow her to exhume Hickok and Smith's bodies from their Kansas graves. McGath knew there was no guarantee that usable DNA could be extracted from the two men's long-buried bodies. After all, they had been decomposing in their graves for nearly half a century. Nonetheless, she believed that any chance of success warranted trying to bring closure to Cliff and Christine Walker's surviving family members. It's absolutely possible to obtain usable DNA, McGath explained. It depends on all kinds of circumstances. The soil conditions, the weather, what type of casket it is in. We will have no idea until we get there. The fact that Hickok and Smith were buried in Kansas offered McGath greater hope of success because it considerably increased the odds of being able to extract usable DNA. She knew that the DNA deterioration process is slowed in bodies buried in higher elevations and away from excessive heat and moisture. Well, obviously, the excessive heat is still a problem. But eastern Kansas, because they were buried outside the prison in Lansing when they were hanged, increases the odds. So, 2 books for you to consider. In Cold Blood, Truman Capote's definitive narrative about the Clutter murders. I want you to read this if you choose to. Remember, it counts for 3. With an eye for how is Capote treating the residents of Holcomb and Kansas. So, In Cold Blood. And then a second book, which we are going to talk about today, is In Colder Blood by J.T. Hunter, which makes the case that the murderers of the Clutter family also murdered this small family in Florida. So I want to take a minute to discuss some stuff with you guys. I didn't want to bring it up, but I think it's important now that I'm not there as much as I would like to be. First of all, I have a 3.5-year-old, and she goes to daycare, which basically means that whenever something major goes through, she gets it. She's had a rough fall. She's not usually this sick, but she's had an ear infection, and now she's got a horrible upper respiratory infection. I had the concussion, but they recently found some worrisome tissue, and there's a strong family history of breast cancer in my family, so I'm having to go through some tests to make sure that that's not the case, and if it does turn out to be the case, which I'm very hopeful it won't be, but if it does turn out to be the case, I'll keep you guys updated because I honestly don't know what it means. I know I'll be gone the 21st because I have to see the doctor for the first time. And then I'm going to Alaska, so I'll be gone for those days. But I'm hoping that once I come back from Alaska, Bruce Lee will be healthy, the cold will have killed all the viruses, and we'll be in better shape. But I wanted to let you know that it's something more serious going on than just I don't want to be there because every day I'm away from you guys, I hate it. I can't imagine doing anything else with my life but teaching. Although I do consider forensic anthropology from time to time. But even then, I think I'd want to be an instructor or a professor. But anyway, I'm rambling. My only companion lately has been a 3-year-old and the world's cutest puppy, who I want to show to you before I sign off because, well, you've had a lot of murder. So I thought I'd show you something fun. Come here, Luca. So this is Luca. She's a blue-nosed pit pup. She's very tired because we've been chewing on our chew toys for a while. Oh, yeah. Say hi, guys. And Luca very firmly believes that her love can cure everybody. She took a nap right up next to Brooksley today, and every time I looked at her little face, she was just so intent that she loved this little girl enough, this little girl would stop coughing and wheezing. So, anyway, I don't want you guys to worry about me. I'm sure I'm going to be fine. But that is what's going on, and just because of the strong family history, they want to make sure that they take every precaution. I'm only 34, so the odds are very good that it's not anything serious, but we got to make sure we follow through. So, as always, please let me know if you have any questions or comments or concerns. I am going to work on grading one-pagers while I'm home, because God knows that's better than watching another episode of whatever TV show she's found. All right, miss you guys.